Hello, my name is Mariah, and welcome back to the list. This is going to be our first side quest as part of the list series, because this list, I don't know if I've mentioned it, it's 100 books to read in your lifetime. However, some of the books are actually series. For example, it says Harry Potter on there, and in parentheses underneath it says series. There's a few different occasions of this, and sometimes if there's a series, it lists the series name and not an individual book in the series. So that is what happened in this case, when I spun the wheel and I landed on the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. I do have all 7 books. I found them at a thrift store for like $1 each. So I went ahead and picked all of them up because I knew I would eventually come to this book on the list. This video is a side quest because I will only be reading the Chronicles of Narnia for this episode of the list. I have already read all 7 volumes of this series, and I have certainly have opinions on them. I will not go into them now. I was just about to, but if you do not know, this is a children's classic series, most well known for the 3 books that have been adapted, and I believe also the first 3 books that were ever published, and that is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. There are 4 additional books. The Magician's Nephew is a prequel. The Horse and His Boy goes in between The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Prince Caspian, though it's really not related in any way to the rest of those books. Just chronologically, that's where it fits. And then the last 2 books are The Silver Chair and The Last Battle. They go chronologically after The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and they are their own stories that arguably fit into an overall arc. But this series, again, if you do not know what it is about, we follow in the original trilogy, if you could call it that, we follow the Pevensie siblings. That's 4 kids who discover a magic world in the wardrobe of this big house they're staying in. And in that world, it is eternal winter, and they meet a bunch of magical creatures and talking animals and have to help them regain their independence from the White Witch who has cast them into this eternal winter. This series is heavily religious. It is allegory for parts of the Bible. I am admittedly not familiar with many parts of the Bible, so going through this, I'm sure a lot of things have gone over my head, but I have talked about the allusions and the allegories that I did catch throughout the series. But without further ado, since I have 7 books to go through, I will go ahead and jump over to Past Me to talk about The Magician's Nephew. So I am back, and I have finished the first book in the Chronicles of Narnia, which is The Magician's Nephew. And I feel like I won't have any ratings for these books simply because they're children's books, and I feel like I can't critique them too much. I mean, they're overall just not, I'm not the target audience. I feel like a lot of stuff in this book was kind of silly, and a lot of kind of the bigger plot points happen closer to the end of the book, which is typically something that I see in books for younger audiences. I almost feel like Harry Potter, at least the first few Harry Potter books that I read, are similar, where it's kind of just them going to school and then shit goes down in the last little chunk of the book. And that's why I didn't like those books at the time, which I'm glad of now. But that's just what pops into my mind as like comparable in terms of the pacing, where it's just kind of they're discovering things and then actual plot happens closer to the end. Now, I do know some about the Chronicles of Narnia. I watched the movies as a kid. I think I saw The Voyage of the Dawn Treader in theaters. I don't know if I saw Prince Caspian in theaters or not, but I definitely saw all the movies as a kid. It has been a long time, and The Magician's Nephew is not one of the books that was adapted into a movie. This is actually, I think this was like the 6th one written, but it's chronologically the first book in the series, because this follows someone we see much older at the beginning of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and it follows the creation of Narnia and how the White Witch ended up in Narnia. So it kind of just gives some context for that. Not that I feel like it's super fleshed out, because we see the White Witch essentially tell us and the main character that she's bad because of some things that she's done, but we don't get to know her and why she's bad. And I guess, again, that's something that I guess wouldn't be delved into as much in a children's book. So I feel like I can't critique it for that, but I kind of want to understand the motivations behind it. Clearly, she's extremely narcissistic and power hungry, but what's going on in her head to justify this? Like literally destroying an entire world that she previously lived in at the beginning of this book. We have a couple in this book. We have a few characters that we follow, mainly Diggory and Polly. They're neighbors, and they are kind of just exploring. They're around the same age, but Diggory has this creepy mad scientist kind of uncle. Obviously he's a magician, but he comes across as a mad scientist and kind of has that god complex, but also just wants everything to benefit him. He's very, in terms of personality, being narcissistic and not caring much for others, he's very similar to the White Witch. And had he more of a spine, I guess he probably could turn into the White Witch or someone similar, but he's not as strong as the character as her, and ends up being mostly like comedic relief in this. Not that there needs to be comedic relief, because again, a lot of this is pretty silly and lighthearted. He has been doing experiments on how to get to these other worlds, and he doesn't completely understand it, nor does he want to risk himself going into these worlds. So he tricks Polly and Diggory into transporting to these worlds using these magic rings that he created. And they initially find the land of Charn, which is where the White Witch is from. It's not explicitly stated in this book that she is the White Witch, but with having context from the movies, and if you were reading this in publication order, you would also have context from the previous books, enough to know that clearly this woman is the White Witch. And she's initially from a world that has quite literally been destroyed. Everyone that is alive is kind of frozen. The world is crumbling constantly, and Diggory is very curious, and he does something to accidentally awaken her again. She's been kind of frozen in time just like everyone else, but it's not explained like why this is there, but there's a bell that has like a message, and he rings the bell and that awakens the witch. That's not explained, but that's how he wakes her up, and she kind of drags herself along with him back to the real world, and in the attempt to return her to her own world, he accidentally takes her to Narnia. And we literally see the creation of Narnia. Everything's pitch black at first, and then we hear a song, and it's like the creation story of the Bible. Obviously, this is alluding a lot to the Bible, and it is pretty much the exact creation story, as far as on the first day there was something. I can't remember. I haven't been to church in years. I think we all have a general idea of like these things, what we know now as like nature and earth and the sun just kind of populating into existence suddenly, and they're witnessing that happen. And the White Witch, I guess, is kind of the Satan in this story. Not that she knew God before she became evil, so it's not completely one for one, but you can definitely see the similarities there. I do kind of question what C.S. Lewis was doing in some portions of this, because in this book you learn that there's kind of this place in between worlds. So it's not just our world in Narnia. There's a like vast infinite number of different worlds that you could go into, which kind of begs the question, with this being a lot of it being like religious allegory, is Aslan or God creating every single one of these worlds? Or is it that he is strictly existing in Narnia and the other worlds would have different gods? I don't know how that works. I don't know if it gets explained. I think it's a little too complicated for a children's book to be explained, but it does bring into question what C.S. Lewis is intending there. I mean, he does, I guess it would make sense if he created all the worlds, because he references immediately Adam and Eve. He refers to the humans as son of Adam, daughter of Eve, but Adam and Eve do not exist in Narnia. So he would have to have some knowledge of the human world's form of Christianity to understand or reference them. But again, that's not delved into, and it's just kind of, to me, a bit strange. But it is interesting, because I obviously had only seen the 3 movies. I didn't have the context of this book knowing that there were multiple worlds and that the White Witch came from a different world. And as far as religious allusions, we get an apple scene, just like the creation story or the fall of man, fall of grace, man's fall of grace from grace, whatever you would call that story, I can't remember, but Adam and Eve, how they eat the apple. We have that, though again, not word for word necessarily, because there is this apple that Diggory is meant to fetch, and that will help protect Narnia from the evil that he accidentally brought into the world. And while he's there, he's tempted by the witch to eat the apple or to take the apple to heal his sickly mother in the real world. So she's obviously playing the role of the snake, or presumably Satan, in that Adam and Eve story. But in this, Diggory does not end up eating the apple. He ends up running from the witch, being better than her, and returning or taking the apple to Aslan to do what's right. So that Adam and Eve story that he is always referencing does not occur in this world. I don't know if there's potentially something similar that happens. I have started The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and it doesn't really explain where the humans went, because or it hasn't yet. I'm over halfway through, because there were 2 humans that became the king and queen of Narnia in this book, but they're nowhere to be seen in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and neither are their descendants as of yet. Now, at the end of this book, when they return home, we do learn about the difference between time in the world of Narnia and our world. So they return back to exactly the same time that they left the real world, even though days have passed while they were in Narnia. So that discrepancy in time maybe plays a role in why the humans aren't there. Maybe they died out. Obviously, the White Witch would have motive to try and attack them, get rid of them, but I'm not entirely sure what's going on there or how much time has passed in Narnia by the time Lucy finds it in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But yeah, that's about a summary of what happens in here. It's not the most, I mean, there were 2 like very obvious allusions and religious allusions in this specific book, but now starting The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I don't see a whole bunch in that. So it's not too heavy-handed, which I worried about. There was a line in here about how Aslan can't speak to the uncle in this book, and it's because the uncle doesn't believe in him, and he says, "Oh, Adam's sons, how cleverly you defend yourselves against all that might do you good." And I felt like I was being gaslit a little bit there, but that's like not overtly religious, I guess. It's just saying that he's intentionally choosing not to believe the things that are right in front of him. And I mean, in this situation, the character is, if we're assuming that every person that doesn't believe in God is intentionally ignoring things that are right in front of him, then that's just incorrect. And that's why it felt a little gaslighty to me. But I guess that is still an argument. Overall, though, it wasn't like overwhelmingly preachy, which I was worried about. I did overall think that this was a solid book, especially if I were a kid reading this. Very simple to read, very accessible. I am not the target audience, so that's why I feel like I can't critique this too much, but I understand how this could be a super nostalgic thing for some people. And the only thing that I kind of have against it that I feel like I can critique is I don't love the narration style. We have this omniscient first person narrator that also sometimes speaks directly to the reader, and that may be more palatable for someone of a younger age. It's kind of bringing you into the story, saying things like, "Oh, I'm sure you wonder what happened to this person, so let's take a step back and look at where Uncle Jacob or Uncle Andrew is." And to me, that's again a little silly, a little too unserious for me. I don't like them speaking to me in that way. I definitely think that I can enjoy something that's direct to reader, but when it's direct to reader simply as a transitional method, that isn't necessarily my favorite. I also think it's strange that we are following all these characters, but we're not reading from a narrator that's involved in the story in any way. It's not like it's in third person, which would make more sense to me. but we're having some non-existent character speaking from first person and telling us the story. Maybe there's a choice behind it, but it just, to me, it's not my favorite, but that is obviously a very personal thing. It's not like an objective mark against the book, it's just my opinion. But yeah, that is this book done. I have 6 more to go, and the next one is the start of the story that I know from the movies. So I will come back and let you know how they compare. Maybe I'll rewatch the movies because I haven't seen them since maybe middle school, probably earlier. I feel like I rewatched one of the movies, or at least part of one of the movies in middle school, but I'm not sure if I saw the entire thing, and I still can't remember that. So if I can find them somewhere, hopefully for free, I might rewatch those after I read the original material. But yeah, that's one book down, and I will talk to you once I finish the second. Bye. So I am back to discuss The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the second book chronologically in the Chronicles of Narnia. I am again not rating this because it's a children's book and it reads like a children's book. This one is the first one that I actually knew the plot of, sort of. I forgot, I think, everything that happened in the Chronicles of Narnia movies, that is, because this is my first time reading the books, except for Mr. Tumnus. But he's still not what I thought he was. Not exactly what I thought he was, because my god, he's a kidnapper. So I want to start off talking about the characters. There are the 4 kids that we're primarily following. Lucy and Edmund are the youngest, and then the older 2 are Susan and Peter, if you haven't seen the Chronicles of Narnia, but if you have, you would know that. Interestingly enough, this takes place during, I believe, World War II, and they are in this like kind of countryside manor with the professor who is the main character of the previous book, but older, and they're sent away there because of the air raids that are currently happening in London, which there's not much discussion of that being like the background of the story, but I didn't know that going into it. If it was mentioned in the movies, I didn't see it. When did this movie come out, by the way? I know I've seen all the movies. I know I was a kid. I'm pretty sure I saw The Voyage of the Dawn Treader in theaters, but I don't know what year it was. No wonder I don't remember. I was 5. Makes sense. But they're exploring the manor that they're in because they're stuck inside, it's raining and blah blah blah, and that's how Lucy finds the wardrobe that leads to Narnia. So all the kids are pretty adventurous, but Lucy is timid. Like, it talks about her being kind of afraid of how big the manor is, which is funny because clearly her curiosity wins over any sort of fear that she has. She also has no self-preservation, so that kind of contradicts with her being a bit of a fearful person, because she goes into this alternate world, which we know is Narnia, but then she meets Mr. Tumnus, and he's like clearly trying to convince her to come back to his house, which is already a red flag. But she's like, yeah, sure, you seem nice. And so she goes with him, and then he admits that his job is being a kidnapper, and it doesn't register her that he's kidnapping her. He has to plainly tell her that before she realizes the danger, and then she doesn't even seem worried. Good thing Mr. Tumnus was actually a nice guy and decided not to be a kidnapper. But damn girl, if this was the real world, you would be dead. Yeah, for somebody that's like so cautious or kind of described as fearful in the first couple of chapters of these books, she really didn't fear the things that she should have when they showed up. On the other hand, now I will say there's a lot of focus on Lucy and Edmund, the 2 younger children. I feel like we didn't get to know Susan and Peter at all. Like, they were just there. They were kind of the voice of reason. They had like their roles to fill, but they weren't real characters. They didn't have much of a personality or a part, in my opinion, in this book. But the other character or child that was focused on was Edmund. And Edmund, I don't remember this in the movie. I do remember like the witch kind of like manipulated him, but he's actually a little shit in this book. Like, he sucks. He's very spiteful, and he makes fun of Lucy after she comes back from Narnia, saying it's not real, but then he finds himself in Narnia and lies and says that Lucy is making it up. So the older kids thinks that she's actually going insane. Like, Edmund, my guy, talk about gaslighting. And when he gets caught lying about Narnia, because he'd been there and they find out that he'd already been there, they call him out for it, and then he gets mad at them. Like, there's a line, let me find it. Yeah, after they call him out, and they're not like insulting him or anything, they're just pointing out that he was lying. And he was saying to himself, I'll pay you all out for this, you pack of stuck-up, self-satisfied prigs. Like, your siblings did nothing wrong. They called you out for you being wrong. So what exactly are you gonna get them back for? And how are they stuck up and self-satisfied? It sounds like you're talking about yourself, my guy. Now, I know he's little. I don't know how old he is, but like, I don't know that many kids that are so bitter. And he seems to think everything's about him. So for whatever reason, he feels like he's not being included in conversation. They're all having a conversation, and he doesn't enjoy it, or didn't enjoy it, because he thought others weren't taking notice of him and trying to give him the cold shoulder. And it plainly says they weren't, but he imagined it. So clearly he thinks it's all about him, even though the conversation is literally like them learning about the state of Narnia and who the queen is and all that jazz. So why would it be about him? I don't know, but he feels like it should be, and so he goes off and he betrays his siblings. Now, we do see him turn over a bit of a new leaf when he sees how cruel the witch actually is, and obviously she's planning on hurting him as well. But I feel like we don't get much of an explanation, because there is a big shift in Edmund's character, and we're told about that, but we don't really see it as much. We just see like him essentially not wanting her to turn these little woodland creatures into stone, because obviously that's bad. They didn't do anything wrong. So just having general morals is what he did, but suddenly later in the book, he's like on Aslan's side. He's fighting against the witch. So, and I don't see where that shift came in, which is frustrating. Similar with Peter, he takes on kind of like this leadership role later in life, and they talk about how he becomes like the High King, but we don't see him mature in this story. He just gets a sword, and that's not maturing. So it's frustrating being told that these characters have growth, but not actually seeing them grow. And honestly, I think that might be because C.S. Lewis is just kind of a lazy writer, and I feel bad saying that, but there's some lines that specifically make me think that. Like, for example, Edmund, when he gets back with his siblings and with Aslan and everybody, he has a conversation with Aslan, and apparently this conversation is when a lot of this shift in character occurs, but we are intentionally not let in on that conversation. So we're not given the reason what Aslan may have said to Edmund to make him change so drastically. And let me find the line. Yeah, it's there they saw Aslan and Edmund walking together in the dewy grass apart from the rest of the court. There is no need to tell you, and no one ever heard what Aslan was saying, but it was a conversation which Edmund never forgot. So what's the point? Why have a conversation and make it so important to this character if you're not going to tell us what was said in the conversation? It makes no sense, and it's lazy in my opinion. Similarly, this author has a lot of times where he says that he can't describe something, or something was beyond description, and I think that's lazy. Just saying you can't describe something is stupid. Just describe it. It would make for more interesting writing. Yeah, he says, and it was all more lonely and hopeless and horrid than I know how to describe. And it's something that I noticed in the previous book and several times prior to this point in this current book, that he has lines like this, and it's okay if like maybe once or twice, but seeing it recurring so much, it's getting to the point where I think he just doesn't want to describe it, and therefore he's taking the easy way out. So I am getting frustrated with this man's writing, his lack of explanation. We don't get a lot of explanation, or any really, in this book as to how the White Witch became queen or where all the humans went, because there were humans in Narnia. According to the previous book, there were humans in Narnia before this time that lived and stayed in Narnia, but it doesn't say what happened to them. We can infer that the White Witch became queen because she turned all these creatures to stone, but the creatures that are currently like living in this kingdom say that there haven't been any humans in Narnia, which isn't true. But why do they think that there haven't been any humans in Narnia? I don't know, and I would like an explanation. Obviously this is a kid's book, so maybe having gaps here and there isn't that big of a deal, but I am an adult reading it, and the gaps are glaringly obvious to me. In this one, I do see a lot of the biblical allusions as well. I mean, the whole plot with Aslan is essentially Jesus being killed and resurrected, and that's very clear. There are some allusions to like other mythos. So with the White Witch, she obviously turns people to stone. That's like Medusa. And similarly, she has her own secret police, which I thought was an interesting kind of allusion to the real world for these children, just like Hitler's secret police. But that wasn't really delved into much. That was really, I feel like, the only allusion that I could see. Obviously the White Witch would be considered a dictator, so if you want to like take that whole concept and say it's kind of mirroring their reality but with a happier ending, I could understand that argument, and that may have been kind of the driving force of writing this book. I mean, it was dedicated to his niece, but maybe he had some of these similarities because of the time period that this was taking place in. Not that he was currently living in, because I believe this was written in the 50s, so World War II would have ended at that point. Another thing that bothers me, and this one is nitpicky, but everybody in the book says it's winter all the time because it's perpetual winter in Narnia while the White Witch is reigning, but they say it's winter all the time but never Christmas. And then Father Christmas randomly shows up and gives gifts to the kids at one point in the book, and I'm confused why Christmas exists in Narnia if Christ does not. Like, it doesn't make sense. They also reference Lilith, which is Adam's first wife. I don't know too much about Lilith, but I do know that's like canonically who she is in regards to the Bible. But Adam doesn't exist in Narnia either. So it doesn't make much sense why these Christian topics are being brought into Narnia when Christianity doesn't exist in Narnia. They don't have the fall of man story that we have in the real world. So I don't know why they keep referencing it. Clearly Christ doesn't exist because Aslan is supposed to be like the Christ character in this book, so why is Christmas existing? I know it's nitpicky, but I need answers. I need C.S. Lewis to explain why he felt the need to put that in there. Was it just because it's a kid's book and like Christmas is fun? Because you're making things not add up. But I digress. Those are my issues with this book. It's not a bad book. Clearly, again, it's meant for kids. It's just things don't make that much sense in the context of Narnia and what their presumed history is, since we miss so much of it. And there's just so many gaps in character and in this world. And I want, as an adult reader, to have those gaps filled in. It doesn't look like that's gonna happen. Like, I've started the third book and I have more questions that are still not answered. So I don't think I'm gonna get answers to these gaps, and I'm just gonna kind of have to deal with that. But they're there and it's frustrating me, but I feel like I need to not take it so seriously. I need to take a step back and remember that I am not the target demographic for this book, and that the target demographic does not care about these plot holes or these gaps in history. So that's this. It's a bit of a rant, even though I didn't like hate the book or anything. I just want C.S. Lewis to be maybe a little more thorough with his writing and his world building. But I have started The Horse and His Boy, which is the third book in the series, about halfway through, and I will update once I finish that. I have thoughts less than this book, but I still have thoughts, so I'll let you know once I've finished it and I've put all my thoughts together, and I'll see you then. Bye. So I am back and I have finished The Horse and His Boy, the third book in the Chronicles of Narnia. I have less tabs, less feelings about this one. Well, I do have some feelings. My first feeling is that C.S. Lewis is showing his racism in this book. So we start out in another country that I did not know existed until this book, called Calormen, and it's in the same world as Narnia, and it is very clearly supposed to be a Middle Eastern country, but our main character is a white boy that just somehow ended up there. And pretty much everyone that's indigenous to this land is portrayed as cruel and like savage, and the main character is like being abused by his father. The king of this land doesn't have any qualms about like throwing his family to the wolves. It's just kind of like a very brutal political movements on his part, and we see that juxtaposed to the Narnians, who are gentle and kind and forgiving and also white. So yeah, no, definitely not a good start for C.S. Lewis. I don't know why he felt the need to write that or this book in general, because I mean, ironically, I'd say like this is the most interesting of storylines to me personally, maybe because we really did only have a couple of characters that we were mainly focused on, and there was like more of a political element to this, which I enjoy. But so far I'm not understanding why this book exists. This was written, I think the final book that he wrote was this one, but chronologically it's the third book. So I'm not seeing what context it adds to the Chronicles of Narnia as a whole. And I have started Prince Caspian. Unless something pops up, then I still am not seeing anything so far in that book to explain why this exists. The first book, I understand why he added that one on. It's like the creation of Narnia. This one, it's during the reign of the children that we see in book one. So they're adults, but it's way before Prince Caspian shows up. So like, I guess we get to see the kids some more and as adults, but we didn't really need to see that because they're gonna go back to their original ages once they enter the real world again. So yeah, I'm not seeing why this book was necessary, especially when it introduces the racial elements to it. Now, the biblical allusions in this book were not nearly as obvious as the first two, and that may just be because I'm not a religious person, so I didn't catch them. I do see like the main character, how he was found by the guy that raised him. It kind of reminds me a bit of the story of Moses. This kid was like on a raft with a dead man, and this farmer or fisherman found him. Moses, I believe, was in a basket floating in the river. So I see some similarities there, but that's kind of where that ends with Shasta, the main character. Like, from my understanding, like Moses was the one chosen to lead God's people, and Shasta doesn't lead any people anywhere, so that's clearly not his role in the overall storyline. That's just something that reminded me of that story. And I do think possibly that Tashbaan, one of the places in the Middle East, is alluding to Babylon, but I actually don't know anything about Babylon. All I know are the Hanging Gardens, and there were a lot of gardens in Tashbaan, and that's where that similarity came to me. I don't know anything else, so that could be like completely off. And then we see some like themes that I would say, or a theme that I would say falls in line with like the morals of Christianity as far as just forgiveness goes. So in Narnia, there is a battle with one of these Calormen people, and rather than harming him, the kings and queens, so the kids that we knew from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, they want to practice like forgiveness, say that though this man obviously came here to harm them, he can change. So I see like just kind of moralistically some allusions there, but nothing that's, again, super obvious like it was in the first and second book. We do have 2 talking horses in this book, which I love. I love a talking horse. We have Gwen and Bree, which I love the name Bree. That was actually the name of my childhood dog. Love her so much. And they're pretty dissimilar to each other. They happen to have been in Calormen because they were, I guess, stolen from Narnia, but they are native to Narnia. Therefore, that's why they're able to speak. And Gwen is really like a calm, sensitive, motherly character. It does imply at some points that she doesn't have a strong disposition or isn't very bold because she's a woman, which I don't love. I think that women have strength and character just as much as men do. So C.S. Lewis, please rethink that. You're dead, so I guess you can't. And then Bree, on the other hand, is actually pretty narcissistic and very proud of himself. He thinks he's so much better than all the other horses because he's speaking. He's not a dumb animal, but in reality, he's just in a place where he doesn't know any other horses like himself. So he has no idea how he compares to all the other horses, and in reality, he's pretty average. But we do see him kind of grow in character and realize how stuck up he is and how he should be willing to make sacrifices for the other people that he cares about. So that's nice. I like actually seeing this growth occur. He starts to feel this way because of a specific event that happens later in the book. They get attacked by a lion, and Shasta goes to, like, jumps off of Bree to kind of try and save his comrade, but Bree just continues fleeing for his life, and he regrets that and feels that he should have been as brave as Shasta was. I still do have issues with the writing. It continues to break the fourth wall. At one point, it like directly referenced the previous book in the series. And if you've read a book called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, you might like to know that this was the very same fawn, Tumnus by name, whom Queen Susan's sister Lucy had met on the very first day that she found her way into Narnia. To me, that bugs me. I don't like him breaking the fourth wall like that. Also, it wasn't necessary because that was Tumnus was like already in the previous book. If you said his name, then we would have known who he was. And he continues to like just kind of randomly speak directly to the reader, so in second person. Again, not my cup of tea, but this book in general was a lot more politically heavy, and that's what drove a lot of the plot. The movement of the action in the story was politically motivated, which I, again, find very interesting. That is more my kind of speed when it comes to a fantasy book. However, along with this politically heavy plot, we do have kind of some more mature language, specifically in the dialogue between these politicians, which I find interesting. I think you can kind of tell that this was the last book he wrote because the language that he's using in this dialogue, I think, would maybe be a little hard to understand for a child who this was originally targeted towards. So I can see that language potentially maturing and becoming more complicated as the original audience who was reading these books as they were coming out, as they grew older and started to maybe desire more mature language or just understand mature language in general. But yeah, that's this one. It was a change of pace from the other two. If we didn't have that underlying racism throughout the whole story, I would say that this is my favorite so far, but unfortunately I can't look past that part. Again, I'm not rating any of these, but we are kind of moving into more aspects of stories that I like as far as the politics go, and I know that some of that does continue into Prince Caspian since he is the rightful heir to the throne, but he's having to kind of fight his way back to that position. So hopefully things will be looking up for me if these portions of the plot continue and we continue in this kind of more political vein and maybe less whimsical, because then I won't have to question why Santa Claus is in a world where Christmas shouldn't exist. But I digress. That was the previous book, but hopefully I won't have any more questions like that going forward. But I will update once I have finished Prince Caspian, and I will let you know. Bye. Welcome back. I have actually finished 2 books, Prince Caspian and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. I was going to update on these one at a time. However, we have had 2 winter storms in these past couple of weeks. And the first winter storm, I had a cold, and that's when I finished Prince Caspian. I also had a foster dog with me, so I was putting off updating this until I wasn't sick anymore, and then I just continued to put it off after I got better, and now I've also finished the next book in the series, so that's why I'm behind. I do think like these kind of do go together because they are within like a relatively close time frame to one another. So only 3 years has passed in Narnia between these 2 books, whereas it had been like thousands of years in between The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and the Prince Caspian. So these have a lot of the same characters. First of all, I want to say I thought maybe I would understand why the horse and his boy existed once I read further in the series, but as of right now, I've read 5 out of 7 books and I don't know why it exists. I don't think that there's really a point to it being there. In fact, it's mainly between, like, there's conflict between 2 countries that we don't see in the rest of the books. Like, it's Calormen and Archenland, which is close to Narnia, but does not show up again in these books. So I don't know why C.S. Lewis added that in there. It seems like a random addition, if you ask me. So a continuation, a bit of a continuation from The Horse and His Boy. There is more politics in the Prince Caspian, because we see almost like a Hamlet situation where Prince Caspian's father was killed by his uncle, and his uncle is now the king. So there's been some usurping going on, and Prince Caspian is trying to regain his rightful throne. His uncle's really trying to kill him. So I guess that it's not super Hamlet coded, because Hamlet's just tried to kill his uncle. So I guess that is where these similarities end. His uncle's after him, he's in hiding, and he meets all the old Narnians, which are the talking animals and the kind of like mystical creatures that we see in the earlier books, and he decides he wants to like restore old Narnia and take his rightful place as king. So we do still have the politics or the political element as far as that goes. The people that Caspian comes from, which are the Telmarines, the description of them and how they came into power in Narnia is very reminiscent of genocide. I mean, obviously my first inclination is to compare it to the Palestinian genocide, because that's one of the atrocities that is currently occurring. But if C.S. Lewis was writing this as a commentary or to reflect a genocide, I assume he would be referring to World War II, since that is kind of the time period in the real world, or in our world, when these books take place. But you see discussions about the Telmarines silencing the old Narnians, killing them, covering up their history, changing history and memory of what old Narnia was about. So much so that like the tales of Aslan and the Pevensie children, they are pretty much forgotten, sometimes even by the old Narnians, like the talking animals and the dwarves and all of them. It's more of like a religion to them, where some do stick to that and some don't believe that it's real. And there is as well a level of censorship where when Caspian is initially learning about these tales, people get in trouble for having told him. Like his nurse that initially told him she's let go of her position, his new mentor or tutor that he gets, he continues kind of this teaching of old Narnia, but in secret, because Caspian now understands the repercussions of learning that information. I think I mentioned this in the last one, but I feel like continuously we are seeing less and less religious allusions in the books. Maybe, again, that could just be because I'm not a religious person and I don't remember a lot of the stuff that I was taught when I was younger and growing up in the church, but I'm not connecting the dots as much. Obviously, like the kind of belief in Aslan is viewed more as a religion in this time period in Narnia because of how long that he's been gone. So you can see him more as like this omniscient, potentially mythical god, and you do have characters that are questioning his existence, characters that I would consider to be like atheists and all of that. Now Aslan does later perform like Jesus-like miracles when he does show up, like as far as healing people, he does kind of do that, which you could maybe argue is an allusion to something. There are more Greek and Roman allusions to myth in this book though, because we actually have like Bacchus, or Dionysus, the god of wine, as a character that shows up later in the book. Kind of random, but whatever. We also have these like annoying schoolboys being turned into pigs, which is reminiscent of the myth of Circe. So it is interesting that he kind of weaves in creatures that we would associate with pagan mythology, dryads and stuff like that. They're also in this, but obviously we know that this is a Christian-based series, yet that still has a presence in it. As far as the characters go, I don't have too much to say. I like Prince Caspian. I appreciate him. Edmund is still kind of a jerk, but like in a reasonable he's a kid kind of way. Like in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, man, that kid was bitter. This is just kind of, he's an annoying tween boy, so I'm okay with that. He does say some kind of like misogynistic stuff, but Lucy's always there to call him out, so we're all good there. I do think the kind of development as far as the Telmarines and Miraz, which is Caspian's uncle, is a little dumb. You don't see too much of them throughout the book, and then suddenly at the very end you learn that the ones underneath Miraz are also unhappy with him and plotting against him. So that seemed, and Miraz is also kind of not the smartest guy in the world. He's very proud, which leads him to making dumb decisions that are not good for his intended outcome. So that felt kind of convenient to the plot, like these things, this turmoil happening and not being mentioned until like right before the final battle is convenient. It's like, oh, okay, so we're gonna fight, we're maybe not prepared, but they're gonna take themselves down because of all this stuff that we're just now learning about. It was, you know, like I said, convenient. It could have been better. I do still have some issues with the writing. Like, I think the fights lacked description. Often the fights were being told, essentially being narrated or told to you by someone that was there or that was watching the fight, and that happened in The Horse and His Boy as well. I just didn't say anything because it made more sense then. But with this one, it's essentially people relaying to other characters what's happening in the battle, which is unnecessary, especially when a lot of our main characters are fighting in the battle. So to me, you would just see it from their point of view, but that is not how C.S. Lewis writes things. It writes important events. It happens in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader as well, where it's like, oh, we're being told about these important things, but we're not there to witness it. And another like just gap I see is he, again, also at the very end, which I feel like is a convenient thing, explains who the Telmarines are, which are humans from our world, and explains like how they got there through this doorway that was on this remote island and that has now disappeared. But again, that felt very rushed, very sudden and convenient. It also doesn't explain why other humans exist in this world. Like, are we to assume that the Calormans and the people from Archenland are all also from our world and somehow ended up in Narnia through a portal? But we aren't told that that's the case. But they are human, so they must have come from our world. Additionally, when you read this chronologically, you know that there are people who become king and queen like right after this world's creation, like human people. And yet when we go into The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, those human people have no presence in Narnia. And so the removal of these people is never explained either. So it's just, I feel like a lot is being just kind of glossed over. It's like, oh, we don't need to explain why this is the case or these events occurred. Or maybe when he went back and wrote these other two books, he wasn't thinking enough about that, and it actually just made it more complicated when you read it in chronological order. But overall, I mean, I didn't dislike Prince Caspian. I liked his like whole storyline where it's explaining him as a character and his past, how he ended up where he is now. But what I didn't like is that it took so much of the book for the Pevensie kids to actually meet Caspian and partake in this like revolution that he's having. That doesn't happen until close to the end of the book. So most of the time it's just them getting lost on the way to find Caspian. So that really, I think, messed up the pace of the book for me, and I could have liked it more had it been handled better. But on the other hand, I do think The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is my favorite book in the series so far. That may be because it's one giant quest. It's very like reminiscent of, well, I say reminiscent of the Odyssey because it is, again, just one big quest across the ocean, and that's what this is as well. The events of the Odyssey certainly do not take place in this book. This book is not as brutal as the Odyssey, nor could it be since it's a children's book, but it just kind of reminds me of that. Maybe that's the vibe he was going for, and he does directly reference the Odyssey further in the book, so that may exactly be what he was trying to do. Now, in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, we do meet Eustace Scrubb, which is a heinous name, and Eustace is such a piece of shit. He's such an annoying brat. I can't help but like him though, because I think of the actor that plays him when I hear his character mentioned, and I've always thought that guy was funny. It's just, I think it's his face. His eyebrows just make for like the funniest facial expressions, so I can't help but like the character because of him. But objectively, at the beginning of this book, Eustace is frankly horrible. And what I appreciate in this book is we actually get to see character growth. We aren't told that it occurs, we see it happen, and I appreciate that. C.S. Lewis, you are learning, because Eustace starts off as this kid that has no friends but is a bully and a coward and thinks he's just right about everything, which is, I think, something he learned from his parents. They seem to think he's also right about everything. They seem like a lot of work, even though we don't meet them. It's just the things that we're told about them kind of give me the impression that they are the kind of people who think their son can do no wrong. So I think he grew up in that environment and that's what he knew. So that's just what he became, and extremely frustrating. He complains about everything, but later in the book he actually he gets turned into a dragon, and in this state where he can't communicate well, he realizes how lonely he is, which obviously he was before this because he had no friends. He just had his parents who were like his little yes men, but he's kind of like coming to terms with that when he's kind of in this state of self-isolation because of the lack of communicating. He, obviously having turned into this monster, gains like this sense of power over others, but realizes he doesn't want it. It isn't necessary for him, like that whatever he could use that power for isn't really beneficial to him, and that he would rather be close to these people and helpful and like his cousins and be friends with them. So we do see a huge shift in his character, and I'm so glad that we do, because this is kind of what I wanted with Edmund in the first book. He's also an annoying child who complains constantly, and we see him just kind of change on a dime. We don't see what it is that makes him change, and purposely C.S. Lewis did not include that conversation that seems to have been the turning point in his character. So I appreciate that he actually did include these moments of self-reflection for Eustace in this book. We do also see Lucy kind of tempted for the first time. Lucy's been like pretty much this innocent kid the entire time. She hasn't had a lot of faults. She's been almost the favorite of Aslan, and I think maybe it's due to her age, is the idea that as she grows older she becomes more self-conscious. So when she gets the opportunity to like say this spell and know what everyone thinks about her, she takes that opportunity even though she knows that it's not right for her to do. So that's interesting. We didn't really build off of that, but it is nice to see like she's not just consistently this one note character. She has some flaws in her, and I think I enjoyed Voyage of the Dawn Treader the most because, again, it's a quest. We're going essentially to the end of the world and seeing if we can find these 7 lords that Uncle Miraz in the previous book had sent away and that are presumed to be dead. So we're going to these unknown places and discovering new islands and the fate of these men. And so we're just seeing a bunch of different stuff and learning new stuff throughout the book, which leads to, in my opinion, the best pacing in this entire series so far. It's consistently new discoveries until we reach the end point where we have to turn around and the quest is effectively over. Now in this we do meet some other people, and the concept of like slave trade is brought into the conversation. At the very beginning of the book we see Caspian kind of assert his power over these people in the Lone Islands, which are territories of Narnia but that have been kind of neglected and left to do their own bidding for a long time. They've taken up this slave trade as a form of like their economic growth. That is essentially all that they have as far as what is keeping their economy going. And we see Caspian bring up all the other potential ways that they could supplement or sustain the economy, and people trying to gaslight him, saying he's too young to understand. And he essentially puts his foot down. He says, yeah, but I'm not too young to tell you that you no longer have a job. And implements the laws as they should be and cuts down on the slave trade. But it is implied that like this decision is going to cause some unrest between Narnia and the places that were involved with this slave trade, that being the Lone Islands and Calormen. They were the ones purchasing a lot of the slaves. So I wonder if in these final 2 books we might see the repercussions of that, but I don't know. I haven't read them, so we'll find out. I hope we get some resolution or some idea of what happens there, because it was left open-ended. We didn't get any answers. We know that he'd decided that this is the way things were going to be, but it's obviously not that simple. There is going to be backlash. There is going to be probably some fights, maybe a war because of it. Again, C.S. Lewis does a lot of his like direct-to-reader kind of stuff. Like when he introduces the Lone Islands, he directly tells the reader that he does not know how the Lone Islands came to be part of Narnia, and if he ever decides that he does know and it's interesting, he'll write a story about it. I don't know. If it felt more tongue-in-cheek, then I feel like maybe I could be okay with that kind of writing and the sudden direct-to-readerness of it all, but it's just personally not my taste, and he continues to still do things like that. He does continue to also tell us plot points, major plot points, but not actually show us, because we have 2 examples of this in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, specifically when Aslan shows up, which is typically a pretty big plot point in this series. So we see Eustace meet, or we don't see Eustace meet Aslan. Eustace tells us, or tells Edmund, that he met Aslan, rather than us actually like going through this with Eustace, even though like a couple of pages prior we were focusing on Eustace's point of view. So to me, again, I don't get why he does it. I think it's kind of lazy in that he maybe just can't or doesn't want to describe the people's feelings during these interactions. Same with Caspian, when we learn that Eustace, Lucy, and Edmund are all going to go to the end of the world, but Caspian can't. He has to turn around and go back to Narnia. He's upset about this, but it's something that Aslan came to him and directly told him about. But it's just, again, we're not seeing that occur. It's just Caspian telling the other characters that happened. So I don't get why he makes that choice. It is really frustrating. I would rather be seeing these interactions occur. I don't need you to tell me they happened. I want to be there and witness it. But that just isn't, it's just a recurring issue with C.S. Lewis that I've seen that he likes to do, and I have a problem with it. But nevertheless, again, I don't see a lot of allusions to Christianity in this book. I do see more allusions to Greek and Roman mythology again. So we have an island where water turns things to gold. That alludes to King Midas, who turns things to gold with his touch. There's also an allusion to Helen of Troy. Yes, when Lucy is tempted to cast a spell to make her the most beautiful woman in the world. It's talking about how kings from all across the world would enter tournaments and then enter wars to have her. To me, that comes across as like alluding to Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships. The only like direct obvious allusions that I can see to Christianity would be one, Aslan's home, or the end of the world, that we kind of see past this wave that is the end of the world. There's a vague image of like mountains and more land, something past that, and that is kind of alluding to heaven. But also Aslan saying that he does have a presence in our world, but goes by a different name. He's directly implying for the first time that he is in fact God. It's not just a metaphor. He's like, yeah, I have a different name, but we obviously all know what that different name is in this book. But other than that, like, I'm not seeing super obvious allusions in this. But yeah, I do overall think these 2 installments are better than the rest of the series. Again, Voyage of the Dawn Treaders has to be my favorite, but these 2 just kind of go together well because they share so many characters. I do have the last 2 books in the series still to go, who I think also share a lot of characters. I don't know how close in time they are to one another, but we have Eustace, he's back, and one of his friends that he goes to school with, she is in both this and the next book. But as far as the plot goes, I don't know too much about this. It does appear that they may go to the underworld, which is interesting, but we'll just have to see how I feel about this. I obviously don't know anything about the story after the point of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, because that is the last one that they adapted into a movie that I'm aware of. So that's when my initial knowledge of the Chronicles of Narnia ends, and this is completely new story to me. So I will update once I have finished this, and hopefully I enjoy it as much as the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, but I am saying that cautiously because I don't know for sure. Welcome back. I have finished The Silver Chair, and I thought about actually combining this with the last book because I don't have too many thoughts on this one, but when I was putting the last book on, or marking it as currently read on Goodreads, I saw that it has a lot of bad reviews, so I think I might have more to say about that one, so I'll just leave it for its own review. But this book specifically did not leave much of an impression on me. But I'll start off, I guess, with kind of the like religious allusions, since I know that's how this story or this world is based, or what it's supposed to like represent. Again, I didn't see anything like super obvious other than like Aslan being that godly figure, and about how he has like his messages that might not always be clear in our world. I did notice that this follows Eustace and one of his classmates, Jill. They go to this school called Experiment House, and I guess C.S. Lewis is kind of against progressive people because Experiment House is just a co-ed school, it sounds like, but he portrays it like really poorly, and it seems like this school very much separates church from state, because it says at one point that Jill and Eustace don't know what daughter of Eve and son of Adam means. So they clearly have like no education on like Christianity, and this is like the first time we've probably seen an unenlightened, I guess, individual, someone that's not part of that realm, kind of enter into Narnia. I mean, obviously Eustace was in a previous book, but we weren't told this information about him previously. There is a reference to the horse and his boy, but it has no relevance. So I'm still not seeing the point of the horse and his boy. And I'm thinking, based on everything that I've read so far and what the last battle is looking like in the first 2 chapters that I've read it, I'm thinking that most of these stories just aren't cohesive to each other. I think that's probably why only the 3 books, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Prince Caspian, and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, were adapted, because those 3 are the only like actually cohesive storylines. There is a bit of a connection to the previous books in this just because Caspian exists, but he's barely in the story. He's like an old man. The connection is like not very strong in this book. It seems very separate from that original trilogy. I don't know if maybe C.S. Lewis initially was just going to write a trilogy and then added on these other 4 books, but that is kind of what it feels like. We do also see a woman who is the villain. She appears both as a snake and as a woman, and so that kind of alludes to the whole serpent or Satan in the Garden of Eden. And then we do see Aslan's home, which is essentially heaven. I mean, he quite literally brings someone's soul to life who's like died. Well, I guess Caspian's elderly, so by the end of the story he's died, but when they get back to Aslan's home, young Caspian, its soul is brought to life in that world. So I do also think it's strange that Eustace and Jill both go to Aslan's home, which is essentially the afterlife, but they're not dead. That's a bit strange to me why C.S. Lewis chose to like let them do that in the story. I don't know why. It just doesn't align with how I would view a story that is, you know, kind of mirroring Christianity. No mortal is supposed to go to heaven and then come back. That just doesn't seem right to me, but that's just something random that I noticed, and it doesn't really matter. One thing I did notice about this specific book though is that it was kind of more comedic than the other ones. So we're seeing some of the previous characters elderly. So Trumpkin from Prince Caspian shows up in this, and he's like pretty much deaf, but not willing to admit that. So he's like talking about how this current generation is always mumbling, but obviously it's just that he can't hear and he's not putting in his hearing aids, which he does have, like these little trumpet things that go in his ears. So effectively hearing aids. So I thought that was funny. I also think it's funny, there is a character that like lives in the marshes of this world. He's kind of amphibian, but also humanoid. It's kind of weird. They call him a marsh wiggle, but his name is Puddleglum. And he's like constantly thinking of the most pessimistic things, the worst scenarios that could occur in their adventures, because he goes on the quest with Jill and Eustace. He's just constantly bringing up the worst case scenario, and it never is the worst case scenario. It's funny in kind of like a hypocritical way, because he's also saying, oh, we should keep an open mind or keep our spirits high. It could be worse, but also at the same time pointing out all these like horrible things. He's also weirdly the bravest character of them all. He's so scared of what could potentially happen, and yet he's the one who's most willing to risk himself or go out on a limb to get Aslan's wishes fulfilled. It shows me that he obviously has like a stronger belief in Aslan than these other characters. But the plot of this book is essentially that Prince Caspian, or King Caspian's son, Rillian, has been missing for 10 years. After his mother died, he kind of started going back to the place that she passed away at and became more distant and eventually just disappeared altogether. And we know it has something to do with this woman that it was at like this fountain or something. And it is Jill and Eustace's, and I guess Puddleglum's job to find Prince Rillian. Early on in the story, they meet a lady who it was very clear that she was the woman at the fountain, to me, obviously, being an adult reading this. And she was with a knight that didn't speak. So that was clearly Prince Rillian. And I was correct. I'm saying it was clearly because like that was immediately what popped into my mind, and that's obviously what happened. But her, specifically her showing up and like kind of giving advice, which was not advice, it was to trick the protagonist and actually get them killed. She reminded me of Arthurian romance. If anyone's ever read like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight or Launval, it gave me the same vibe as those, and I read those for my British lit class in college. Just like this random woman showing up and weaving mischief for our protagonist. Usually in Arthurian romance, it would be like Morrigan or sometimes Guinevere. It doesn't help that she had the knight with her, and she was also described as like wearing the color green or having green mist around her. So it kind of further kind of pushed the resemblance to Sir Gawain and the Green Knight for me, even though the plot's very different. Just kind of that role that a woman antagonist plays reminded me a lot of Arthurian romance, which is, in my opinion, pretty misogynistic. And I think C.S. Lewis probably is too, since the times that he's like had one sole villain character, it has been a woman, i.e. the White Witch, and then this witch that doesn't really have a name. But in going after Prince Rilian, the protagonists end up in this like underground world. I thought they were going to the underworld, and technically they do call it the underworld sometimes, but it is literally like towns, cities, like an entire world underground, and it's primarily made up of gnomes, but the witch has control over this land, and this is ultimately where they find Rilian, where they have the conflict with the witch and end up defeating her. I did think, however, everything that happened after that occurred underground was really random and rushed. There was like a flood. So I guess that maybe is like the flood from Noah's Ark, except nothing else had to do with Noah's Ark. There was just randomly a flood underground, and then like the ground splits open and the gnomes all jump in because that's like was their original home. It's just very chaotic, and it felt random to me why all this was going on at once, when really all you needed to do was explain that the gnomes were not actually on the witch's side and then leave. That's all they needed to do. But there was just so much happening, like this town that they were in was being destroyed. So I guess this level of the underworld was being destroyed, but the deeper level that the gnomes were actually from was fine. And we don't get to see that level because, one, there's like lava and fire there. I'm not sure a human could live there. But two, like they had other places to be. Yeah, we obviously didn't see that, but there was a lot of talk about potentially seeing that. It was weird. I also thought the ending of this book was weird because we still have that like kind of conflict with the experiment house that Eustace and Jill were going to school at, and they were being bullied relentlessly. And how this ended up being resolved is the kids and Caspian went back to our real world and just like chased these kids around and beat them and terrorized them. And then like the teacher comes out and she's hysterical, and we have to point out that she's specifically a woman. C.S. Lewis did specifically take the time to point that out because apparently only women get hysterical, but I digress. It ends with that and like her being replaced, and I guess Experiment House getting better because they scared this woman and these children and like hit them with the flats of their swords and whipped them. I don't know what was going on there. It was something. Overall, some of this book was fun because it felt like a fairy tale kind of, with the woman and the knight and her giving them bad advice, almost getting them killed and eaten by giants, because that is what she tricked them into doing, going to like this giant town where she said they're friendly, but actually they just were gonna eat the children. So it felt like kind of like a fun little fairy tale with that aspect, but then we get to the underground and it's just so chaotic. It really took a turn after that. Like after we'd resolved the main issue of the witch and finding Prince Rilian, everything just got very jumbled, very chaotic. I don't know why C.S. Lewis felt the need to end the story in the way that he did, but it really left the story on like a poor note for me. It still isn't cohesive to the rest of the series in my opinion, but it could have been decent, standing on its own, had he not just gone in that like completely random and chaotic direction at the end. So yeah, I can't say that I particularly love this one, and most of my issues are because of the ending of the book. But apparently, based on the ratings of this next book in the series, which is The Last Battle, it gets worse. So yeah, I'm not looking forward to reading it necessarily, but I'll tell you how I felt. Certainly, I feel like I'm gonna have a lot of strong feelings because apparently this is extremely racist and misogynistic. The Calormans are already here. We've already murdered 2 of them, so that's not a good sign. I have other things to say already, and I'm only not even 30 pages in, but I will save that for when I've actually finished this book. This is, I think, the shortest, or one of the shortest of the series, so shouldn't take me too long. And I will certainly have thoughts to share, but wish me luck on this one. I'll update you and close out this vlog once I finish this book. I am back and I have finished The Last Battle, and my god, it was not good. Those reviews were right, and I do not know this story of the Bible at all. I'm just gonna flat out let you know. Even in the brief time that I did go to church as a child, Revelations is pretty messed up, so I didn't learn about that. I know it gets kind of crazy. It becomes like very fantastical compared to the rest of the events in the Bible. And it is the basis of many a cult. So there's always that. But this book is very clearly C.S. Lewis's version of Revelations occurring in Narnia. We start out at the beginning of the book stating that it is the end of Narnia, that the current king is the last king of Narnia. Starting off this book, it is kind of strange because usually we start off with someone in the real world, in our world. So the Pevensie children, Eustace and Jill, or even Diggory from The Magician's Nephew. I guess the exception would be the horse and his boy, since that takes place completely inside the world of Narnia. But otherwise, usually we're starting out with the children being brought into the world of Narnia. However, in this book, we start out with our villain, of all people. Well, one of the villains? I don't know. We'll have to talk about the antagonist of the story and how it's extremely racist. But the initial antagonist that we see is actually this ape who is very manipulative and has this kind of donkey friend who's not very smart and tricks the donkey into pretending to be Aslan. So we have a false god right from the beginning, and this causes obviously a lot of trouble. It causes people to lose faith in Aslan, and specifically most of the dwarves completely turn against any sort of like authoritative figure. So against Aslan, against the government, the kings, the people that are trying to take over Narnia, they're against all of them. They decide that they're gonna take on ruling themselves, which fair enough. I didn't like their methods because they did kill a bunch of horses, but if you feel like you're being manipulated, then fair enough, go self-govern yourself. There are like a few other just random allusions to religion in this one, like Susan. All of the kids, including the 2 from The Magician's Nephew, who are elderly now, are in this book except for Susan. For some reason, nobody likes Susan. It appears to me that Susan, like, no longer believes in Narnia. I don't know what Susan did to C.S. Lewis, but she is no longer a friend in this book. And so I guess that's supposed to represent someone losing their faith. It's not really elaborated on. It's just randomly stated that she is no longer a friend of Narnia, and we do not see see her. We don't know where she's at throughout the story. And this book does end with the destruction of Narnia in its entirety, the world ceasing to exist, dragons and giant lizards and whatever the fuck coming out of the ground and completely destroying the land, and then a great flood that covers everything. So yes, very much Revelations in that sense. I don't know all of the aspects of Revelations, but I do know these like monsters, and I think false gods are mentioned in that, as well as people, the believers, being brought into heaven, and that does occur in this as well. So there's a doorway into Aslan's home, aka heaven, and all the people and the animals rush towards that doorway, but the ones who are not believers are veered off to the left, and we don't actually see what happens to them, but clearly the earth is being destroyed. So it's not fun. Now for the racism of it all. In this book, we do see the Calormans come back, and they are working with this ape named Shift to take over Narnia, and they're part of this ruse with the false god. They're pretending that Tosh, their god, is the same as Aslan. The Calormen are brown and they have turbans, so they're very obviously designed after like Middle Eastern people, and so I thought it was kind of strange that he was implying that like Tosh and Aslan were not the same, because in my mind Tosh would maybe be Allah, which is God, but I don't believe that I don't think that's what he's saying, because Tosh is like a human bird kind of combination in this, so it reminds me more of maybe an Egyptian god. However, Tosh is real. He does show up in this book, which continues to confuse me, that there's gods and goddesses in Narnia, but there's also Aslan, who is supposed to be God. The two just like don't go together in my brain, that we're supposed to be believing a monotheistic story, but you having polytheism spread throughout the same story. I don't know where C.S. Lewis was going with that. Maybe the one capital G god is the god over all the other gods, even though allegedly there are no other gods because it's a monotheistic religion, but I digress. That's not the point. The point is the Calormans are very clearly the villains in this book. Just as they were in The Horse and His Boy, they're described as these brutal, almost barbarian type people, and with the exception of one good Calormen in this story. We start off the story kind of like the big catalyst is the current king, Tyrion. He's very reckless, if you ask me. He learns that the Calormen are there and they're abusing some of the talking horses, and instead of, you know, doing what a king should do and diplomatically confronting these people about what they are doing and why they cannot do it, he just murders two of them. Like, no problem at all. Just as soon as he sees what's going on, he's angry and he kills them. Okay, sure. He does acknowledge that this is wrong, that he should not have done that. So I'm glad that he acknowledges that. I'm still not okay with like you immediately seeing a brown person and killing them. So there's that. To elaborate again on like how the Calormans are portrayed, they're said to perform human sacrifices, and again, obviously they're the only brown people in this world, and they're being portrayed as villainous, and it rubbed me the wrong way earlier, but now it's even more overt racism in this story. In fact, we have the dwarves refer to them as darkies, which I didn't love. I know I don't love the dwarves either. Like, go on, guys, self-govern, cool, but they're like not the nicest people in the world. We also, and the most unexpected racist thing to occur in this book was brownface. Yeah, after the king kills those two and he goes into hiding, he comes across the kids, Eustace and Jill, and decides they need to disguise themselves as Calormans, so they paint themselves brown and they put on turbans. And they walk around that way for like half the book, and it's apparently just not an issue. This was written in 1950. I understand that we had not advanced very much in terms of civil rights. I don't know about England, because I don't live there. I didn't didn't learn a lot of the history, at least not the recent history of England, but I thought we'd moved past blackface by the 50s. I thought that was something that was only in like black and white films and not in a beloved children's classic, but it is, and it pisses me off. Additionally, when Narnia, the world of Narnia, ceases to exist, only one Clorman is spared. All of the rest die, so that's nice. They will be in eternal suffering because apparently they're all evil with the exception of one. At least we have our token brown person in heaven. Thank you, C.S. Lewis. You did so much for them, Clive. So much. So yeah, no, this is a really horrible book as far as the racism goes. He really said the horse and his boy was not enough. I need to make this as blatant as possible, and wrote this. Keeping with the discussion of that Clorman who made it to heaven, there's a weird conversation that happens with Aslan and the Clorman in Aslan's homeland, aka heaven, and he's implying that Tosh, their god, is the opposite of Aslan, which I would take to mean he's Satan. But this man worshipped Tosh and believed in Tosh throughout all of his life, and Aslan tells him essentially that since his faith in Tosh was pure and good intentioned, that he was really worshipping Aslan, not Tosh. Which doesn't make sense to me. He does turn around and then say, like, people who say that they believe in me but do harm in the name of that faith, they will not come to my homeland. So, like, I appreciate he's calling out hypocrites, but I'm a little confused by the previous statement. I mean, I'm not mad about it, that he had, you know, a pure belief and he wasn't being hypocritical. I'm just a little confused by that as far as the Christian stance. I mean, I'm clearly not Christian, but I don't know how that aligns with the actual belief. And it does kind of confuse me because, like, no, he didn't worship Aslan. He worshipped Tosh, and he can still be a good person and worship Tosh, obviously, but it doesn't mean that just because his intentions were pure that he was worshiping Aslan. He had his own god, and he's valid in believing in that god. So yeah, no, it threw me off. Maybe I am just too stupid, but that particular conversation just kind of confused me. Additionally, and I'm gonna just talk about negatives, the writing in this was still bad. The random use of second person, sometimes it can be in there well, like I understand the transition to the second person. There is, however, a particular time in here that I am offended, and it's in a completely different vein from the rest of the book, but I just have to read this because we're talking about a cat that's in this book, and he's like screaming. He's seen something, he's very afraid, and he's saying that the sound is the most horrible caterwaul you have ever heard, made everyone jump. And then it says, you have been awakened yourself by cats quarreling or making love on the roof in the middle of the night. You know the sound. I'm sorry, no, Clive, I haven't heard the sound of cats making love. That's weird that you would tell me I've heard that. I do not know that sound, nor do I want to know that sound. Why do you know that sound? Don't tell me I know something that I don't. You're weird. And I didn't think that transition into second person was very fluid. It also was just the strangest way that he could have described a cat yelling. Like, just say it sounded like somebody stepped on its tail. What the hell are you talking about, cats making love? That's fucking weird. Additionally, he's still lazy. He doesn't want to describe stuff. Like Eustace, for example, he's in a battle. He apparently kills some things, like a talking fox, maybe a person, I don't know. He couldn't tell you how he did it though, because he can't remember the battle that he just fought in. Okay, they also can't describe the afterlife. It's said several times, and it's said so much throughout the series, but it just happens so much in the afterlife. It's like he kept saying you'd have to be there to understand, or once you're there you'll understand, but it cannot be described described at this moment. I'm like, okay, so why are you telling me any of it if you can't describe it? What's the point? Additionally, this is more of a plot thing, and I thought it was interesting because I figured it out. I was like, oh, cool. We're not gonna actually like say this straight up. It's gonna be something implied, and it's like interesting to think that that's how this ended, because we're talking about before everyone, Diggory, Polly, Eustace, Jill, Lucy, Edmund, and Peter, they all go into Narnia at around the same time. Narnia or the afterlife. They went to different places around the same time, and they all mention that right before the train that some of them were on and that some of them were watching come in to the station was coming around the curve really fast, and that it was almost like there was a bang. And we're ending the story in Aslan's home, aka heaven, whereas the stories usually end in our world. So the implication is that the train really did crash and they're all dead. And I was like, oh, that's such an interesting implication. And then on the very last page, they just outright say it. Why? We have brains. Everything's pointed to that. You don't need to say it outright and just drop it on the very last page of the series. We can figure that out. That bugged me because like it's very clearly implied, and C.S. Lewis just had no trust in his readers apparently to understand that. So he decided, I'm just gonna literally put it in the last paragraph of the story and leave it there. Put more faith in me, please. Like, I understand that some of the religious allegory goes over my head, but that's not an allegory, it's just the events of this book, and I can put those together. So C.S. Lewis, I'm usually okay with people spelling stuff out for me, but that was a bit much. So overall, I've read the series. I get to mark it off my 100 book list, even though this is 7 books. And then I get to get rid of these. Obviously not the target audience. The series as a whole, I can't say that I necessarily enjoyed. I would say that the original 3 books are valid as children's classics. I understand why these are on the list. They have a nostalgic factor even for me. So I get it. These kind of have the fairy tale aspect to it. It's fun. I'm sure lots of children enjoyed this. The rest of the books, however, I'd say The Magician's Nephew makes sense as well. I can understand wanting to read this one. It's just a prequel. It gives you context of where the White Witch came from and how Narnia came to be. So there's nothing I have against this one in particular. However, The Horse and His Boy and The Silver Chair were both very random. They're not really needed in this story. Neither, frankly, is this. I think he just wanted to adapt Revelations into this world. He wanted an end to Narnia, and that end to be quite literally the end of the world. So that's why I think this one existed. It did not need to, and in my opinion, neither did either of these books. They're kind of just filler, and unfortunately, 2 out of the 3 fillers are extremely racist. So C.S. Lewis could have done himself some favors not including those books, but he kept them in. So they do overall affect my opinion on the series as a whole, and I'd say it's pretty negative. I don't think that these are really a cohesive story altogether. You could argue that the 3 with the Pevensie children are, and that's why I think they are all 3 valid stories to like be treasured as children's classics. But the series as a whole, I would not recommend. I'd say just stick with the 3 that were adapted into movies. There's a reason it was only those 3. But that is the Chronicles of Narnia done, and 7 books that only get me 1 square to mark off on this list. So unfortunate, but I knew when I saw them at the thrift store I was going to read the whole series, whether I liked it or not, and unfortunately it does lean to the dislike. And I mean, it was an experience. I can say that I've done it, and now I can pass these on to some people who are actually the appropriate age range to read it and may enjoy it more than me. But that is it for this video. If you guys have read the Chronicles of Narnia, let me know. If you've only read the 3 that have been adapted, good for you, don't read the rest. But if you've read like the other 4, also definitely let me know and tell me what you thought, because I really don't think they're necessary, and I imagine the opinion is the same for others, but I don't know. I haven't talked to anybody who's read the series before. So that is it. Those are my thoughts on this beloved children's classic. I will see you all in my next video. I am working on the next video in this series, but obviously I took a bit of a side quest, so it's gonna be some time before I complete the next installment. But I'll see you then, maybe even before. Have a good one. Bye.